Fact: our brain prefers a familiar cage over an unknown forest. Most of us think control would feel violent, obvious, loud. But the darkest kind of control rarely feels painful in the beginning. It feels efficient, predictable, comfortable. We wake up at the same time, reach for the same screen, repeat the same emotional reactions. And because repetition feels familiar, the mind stops questioning it. That is how control survives, not through force, but through normalization. Somewhere along the way, comfort became more important than awareness. And the terrifying part is, our brain actually rewards this. The mind would rather live inside a predictable prison than face uncertainty. Even when the prison is slowly draining us, even when it is reshaping our identity, that is why so many of us defend the very things exhausting us. Not because they're healthy, because they are familiar. A strange thing begins happening when a system controls us long enough. We stop noticing the walls. Routine disguises itself as personality. Emotional dependency disguises itself as love. Constant stimulation disguises itself as happiness. And eventually, we stop asking whether any of it was our choice to begin with. Because the moment a cage becomes familiar, it stops looking like a cage. Some behaviors do not begin naturally. They are installed through repetition. The mind learns through emotional loops. This is the mechanics of theory, reality that neurons that fire together, wire together until the habit is no longer a choice, but a biological map. Repeat something long enough, attach emotion to it, and eventually the brain stops treating it like a decision. It becomes automatic. That is where manipulation becomes dangerous. Because once behavior becomes automatic, awareness disappears. We start calling things habits simply because they happen often, but frequency does not prove authenticity. Sometimes repetition is not, sometimes repetition is conditioning. Every notification, every emotional trigger, every tiny reward, each one trains the nervous system. And the scariest part is that modern control rarely demands obedience directly. It simply shapes environments that quietly train behavior over time. We think we are choosing, but many of our reactions were rehearsed long before we noticed them. Even our distractions are carefully designed because a distracted mind is easier to guide than an aware one. And slowly, we begin participating in our own programming without resistance. The human brain can be controlled without fear. Pleasure works faster. A small reward is enough to train behavior. That is why modern systems rarely punish first. They seduce first. Tiny dopamine hits, validation, attention, endless stimulation. The brain starts chasing emotional relief the same way thirst chases water. And eventually, the mind stops asking an important question: who benefits from our attention? Because addiction does not always look destructive. Sometimes it looks productive, social, entertaining, normal. That is what makes it powerful. We become emotionally attached to the very things draining our focus because they also provide temporary comfort. And temporary comfort is enough to keep the cycle alive. This is why many of us feel mentally exhausted while constantly stimulated. Our attention is being harvested piece by piece. And the frightening truth is, the brain cannot easily distinguish freedom from pleasurable control. If something feels good immediately, the mind lowers its defenses. That is exactly what manipulation depends on. Not all control comes from systems. Some of it comes from people. The deepest manipulation often hides inside emotional dependency. When our emotional stability depends entirely on another person, fear quietly enters the relationship. Fear of abandonment, fear of silence, fear of rejection. And fear changes behavior faster than logic ever could. We start shrinking parts of ourselves to preserve connection. We become careful, filtered, emotionally edited, not because someone demanded it directly, but because the nervous system learned survival. That is how invisible control works. It does not need chains. It only needs emotional consequences. The terrifying part is how normal this can start to feel. We convince ourselves it is loyalty, love, attachment. But a real connection does not require the moment our identity becomes dependent on someone else's approval, manipulation no longer feels external. It begins living inside us. Fact: decision fatigue is the primary tool used by modern systems. An exhausted mind obeys faster. That is why constant stimulation matters so much. Because mental exhaustion weakens awareness, when the brain becomes overloaded with noise, information, pressure, comparison, and endless choices, something dangerous happens. Critical thinking starts shutting down. As your cognitive load increases, the brain loses its ability to filter manipulation, choosing convenience over truth simply because it is too tired to think. And eventually, survival mode takes over. We stop questioning, we stop reflecting, we stop observing ourselves. The mind begins choosing convenience over truth because exhaustion makes awareness feel expensive. That is why overstimulation is not accidental. The tired population reacts emotionally instead of consciously. And the more mentally exhausted we become, the easier it is for others to decide what we consume, believe, fear, and desire. An overwhelmed brain does not search for freedom, it searches for relief. That is why distraction became one of the most profitable industries in human history. Most control does not begin with authority. It begins with imitation. Human beings are deeply afraid of social rejection. And because of that, the brain constantly scans for one thing: what behavior keeps us accepted? That question silently shapes entire personalities. We laugh when others laugh, hide opinions when tension enters the room, pretend to agree to avoid becoming the outsider, and eventually, survival starts looking like identity. That is why groups are so powerful psychologically. The fear of exclusion can override logic, morality, even self-awareness. We start editing ourselves automatically, not because someone forced us, because belonging feels safer than honesty. And the frightening part is how invisible this process becomes over time. The more approval we receive for conformity, the harder authenticity begins to feel. Slowly, our real thoughts become private, then unfamiliar, then silent, until one day we wake up performing a version of ourselves designed entirely for acceptance. And the mind calls this normal. In fact, some of us stay busy because silence feels dangerous. Modern life rewards constant movement. Always working, always scrolling, always consuming. And because exhaustion became normal, stillness now feels uncomfortable. That is not accidental, because silence forces observation. And observation reveals things that distraction was hiding. Unprocessed emotions, fear, loneliness, identity, confusion. So instead of facing ourselves, many of us stay in motion. We fill every quiet moment with stimulation because the brain learns something terrifying. Distraction temporarily protects us from awareness, but there is a cost. The more constantly stimulated the mind becomes, the weaker its connection to itself. We lose the ability to sit with our own thoughts without escaping them. And eventually, productivity stops growing. It becomes an avoidance-wearing achievement as a disguise. That is why some of the busiest people secretly feel the emptiest. Because movement is not the same thing as meaning. And endless distraction can become one of the most sophisticated forms of psychological control ever created. Sign number 6. The outsourcing of the inner voice. We often believe our choices are born from a vacuum of free will. But the dark reality is that behavior is rarely spontaneous. It is a calculated response to a mapped vulnerability. Manipulative systems, whether digital or human, do not need to tell us what to think. They simply need to observe our predictable reactions to fear, desire, and uncertainty. Once your patterns are observed, they are codified. You become a known variable in an equation you didn't, right? This is the echo chamber of the self. By feeding us only what we are already wired to respond to, the system ensures we never encounter a thought that could lead us to the exit. We are not being told where to go. We are being led down a hallway we believe we built ourselves. We call it preference. They call it optimization. This is the trap of algorithmic determinism, where your future is no longer a choice, but a calculation based on who you used to be. When your future is decided by your past data, you aren't living or being replayed. Identity rarely collapses all at once. It happens slowly, quietly, repeatedly. One compromise, one performance, one suppressed emotion at a time. Until eventually, the version of ourselves we present to the world becomes stronger than the version quietly observing underneath. And that is where many people become psychologically lost, because the mind can adapt to almost anything, even self. We become who our environments reward. That means identity is constantly being shaped by attention, approval, fear, and repetition. And if we never consciously examine those influences, the world begins writing our personality for us. The terrifying part is that identity manipulation does not feel dramatic while it is happening. It feels gradual, reasonable, normal. That is why people can spend years becoming someone they never intentionally chose to be. And eventually, a strange emptiness appears. Not because success is missing, because authenticity is, deep down, something still remembers that this version was constructed for survival, not truth. One of the darkest psychological facts is this: human beings often defend the things controlling them, because familiarity creates attachment even when the familiarity is painful. The brain interprets predictability as safety. That means harmful patterns can start feeling emotionally secure simply because they are known. Toxic relationships, self-destructive habits, endless distraction, emotional dependence. We cling to them not because they help us, but because uncertainty feels more frightening. That is how control becomes internalized. Eventually, no external force is even necessary anymore. We begin policing ourselves, protecting the routines exhausting us, defending the systems draining us. Repeating patterns are hurting us, because at least the pain feels familiar, and the mind would rather suffer predictably than step into the unknown. That is why freedom feels terrifying to so many people. Freedom removes excuses, freedom removes scripts, freedom demands awareness. And awareness forces us to confront a question many people spend their entire lives avoiding: if the cage opened tomorrow, would we even know how to leave it? Fact: silence exposes programming faster than noise ever will, because silence removes distraction. And without distraction, patterns become visible. For the first time, we begin noticing how automatic many behaviors really are, how quickly we reach for stimulation, how uncomfortable stillness feels, how many thoughts were inherited instead of consciously chosen. That realization can feel deeply unsettling, because awareness starts revealing something most people spend years avoiding: how much of our personality was built through conditioning. Silence interrupts autopilot, and autopilot is where manipulation survives best. That is why modern life constantly fights for our attention, because a mind that never pauses, never observes itself clearly. But the moment we sit alone long enough, the noise starts separating from the self, and beneath all the conditioning, fear, distraction, and performance, something quieter begins appearing. Observation, not judgment, not panic. Observation. And the moment the mind learns to observe itself honestly, control starts losing its invisibility, because manipulation depends on unconsciousness. Awareness destroys that advantage. Fact: awareness is the only weapon that does not require a fight, because the moment we see the pattern clearly, control begins weakening. Not instantly, not completely, but awareness interrupts automation. Silence becomes dangerous to manipulation because silence allows observation, and observation exposes conditioning. For the first time, we start noticing how many reactions were borrowed, how many fears were inherited, how many desires were installed. And that realization can feel terrifying, because awareness does not only expose the systems around us, it exposes the versions of ourselves shaped by them. But this is where psychological freedom actually begins. Not in rebellion, not in aggression, in observation. The ability to sit quietly and ask, what in our life was truly chosen and what was programmed? Because once the mind learns to observe itself honestly, manipulation loses its invisibility, and the systems that once controlled us so easily suddenly face something extremely dangerous: a conscious human being, subscribe for deep knowledge, the silent mindset.